Today on our news briefing, we turn to a story raising questions about federal authority, campus safety, and civil liberties. Columbia University has accused federal immigration agents of misrepresenting their purpose to enter campus and detain a student. The student has since been released, following a reported meeting between New York City's Mayor Zohran Mamdani and President Trump. What really happened, and what does it mean for students, universities, and federal enforcement? Let's break down the facts and the implications in today's top headlines. IRS Privacy Breach Scandal. The Internal Revenue Service, IRS, is one of the most sensitive and heavily regulated federal agencies in the United States, responsible for collecting taxes, administering federal tax law, and safeguarding confidential taxpayer information. U.S. law, including the Privacy Act of 1974, imposes strict limitations on the sharing of personally identifiable information with other agencies. Violations of these laws can have significant legal, financial, and reputational consequences. Over the past decade, there have been growing concerns about the IRS's data sharing practices, particularly regarding information transmitted to other federal agencies for enforcement, immigration, or homeland security purposes. Balancing enforcement priorities with legal privacy obligations has been a consistent challenge, especially as federal agencies increasingly integrate databases and digital systems. According to the recent federal court ruling, the IRS improperly shared confidential taxpayer data with the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. A federal judge found that this practice violated privacy laws in approximately 42,695 instances, representing a systemic failure rather than isolated errors. The data shared reportedly included sensitive personal and financial information, which under U.S. law is protected unless there is specific statutory authorization for disclosure. The ruling emphasizes that the agency's actions were not in compliance with the Privacy Act or other relevant regulations governing federal data sharing. Federal court documents indicate that the breaches occurred over a multi-year period, and were only partially disclosed internally before investigation by watchdogs and advocacy groups. DHS has acknowledged receiving information but maintains that it relied on IRS data for national security and enforcement purposes. From a legal and policy perspective, the ruling underscores a profound tension between national security priorities and individual privacy rights. Experts highlight several key points. Scale of the breach. 42,695 violations represent one of the largest confirmed privacy breaches in IRS history, demonstrating systemic compliance issues. Institutional accountability. The ruling is likely to prompt internal audits, potential disciplinary actions, and congressional oversight hearings. Interagency processes. Analysts note that data sharing protocols between federal agencies are often complex and can blur lines of authority, but the court's decision reaffirms that legal limits cannot be circumvented. Newsroom experts emphasize that while DHS may have used the data to identify immigration risks or security threats, the absence of proper authorization exposes both agencies to lawsuits, reputational damage, and calls for reform of interagency data sharing policies. Domestically, this scandal has immediate implications for taxpayer trust in the federal government. Citizens expect that their financial and personal information is protected under strict legal frameworks. Breaches of this magnitude erode confidence and may reduce voluntary compliance with tax obligations. The ruling also sends a clear message to other federal agencies regarding the legal limits of data sharing. It could trigger reforms in how sensitive data is handled, including enhanced oversight mechanisms, encryption protocols, and reporting obligations. Globally, U.S. privacy standards influence international practices, particularly among allied countries that exchange tax and financial information. A high-profile breach could affect data sharing agreements and diplomatic discussions regarding cross-border financial compliance. The IRS will likely conduct comprehensive internal reviews, identify responsible personnel, and implement stricter safeguards. Congressional oversight committees may hold hearings to demand accountability and recommend reforms. DHS may review its handling of received data and adjust its policies to ensure legal compliance. Affected individuals may pursue legal remedies or settlements. Long-term, This ruling may result in new legislation or executive guidance clarifying the limits of federal interagency data sharing and taxpayer privacy protections. Pentagon shoots down CBP drone. The United States maintains one of the most sophisticated air defense and border surveillance systems in the world, combining military and civilian resources. U.S. Customs and Border Protection operates drones to monitor the southern border for illegal crossings, smuggling, and other security threats. These unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, are typically coordinated with the Department of Defense and other federal agencies to ensure safety and prevent airspace conflicts. Military laser systems are increasingly deployed for precision engagement and defensive measures. While intended primarily for testing or foreign threat mitigation, these high-energy systems can interact unexpectedly with domestic operations if coordination protocols are not followed rigorously. The incident near Fort Hancock, Texas, highlights the inherent risks of operating multiple aerial platforms in congested or overlapping airspace zones. Reports indicate that the Pentagon deployed a laser-based system to shoot down a CBP drone in the vicinity of Fort Hancock, Texas. The circumstances are officially described as an accident, though details remain under investigation. Key facts include: the drone was actively operating under CBP surveillance protocols. Upon engagement by the military laser system, the drone was destroyed or rendered inoperable. The incident prompted an immediate closure of airspace over Fort Hancock to ensure safety for other aircraft and to allow federal investigators to assess the situation. Officials have launched a joint review by CBP, DoD, and FAA authorities to determine the sequence of events, compliance with airspace regulations, and accountability. No injuries were reported on the ground or in the air. Investigators are assessing whether communication breakdowns, misidentification, or technical malfunctions contributed to the incident. From a defense and security analysis standpoint, this event underscores the challenges of integrating advanced military technologies with domestic law enforcement operations. Laser weapon systems, while highly precise, are still experimental in many deployment scenarios. The fact that the target was a U.S. agency drone rather than a foreign object raises critical questions about coordination, identification protocols, and risk mitigation. Experts highlight three main points: airspace deconfliction. U.S. federal airspace, particularly near the border, hosts multiple drones, manned aircraft, and military operations. Coordination errors can have immediate safety consequences. Command and control. Laser systems require strict oversight. The Pentagon's protocols may not have accounted for simultaneous CBP drone activity in the target zone. Technology versus procedure. Even highly advanced systems are only as safe as the operational procedures governing them. Investigators will likely focus on whether human error, software misidentification, or procedural gaps were primary causes. The event also carries political and operational implications. While officially labeled an accident, critics may frame it as an example of interagency friction or overreach, raising broader questions about the domestic use of advanced military technology. Domestically, the incident is significant because it affects border security operations, public confidence in interagency safety protocols, and the management of experimental military technologies over civilian areas. Immediate impacts include temporary disruption of CBP surveillance and increased scrutiny of drone deployment near active military systems. Globally, the incident signals the rapid integration of directed energy weapons into U.S. domestic airspace operations, which could attract international attention. Allies and adversaries alike monitor U.S. laser and drone capabilities, and accidents, even domestic, can influence perceptions of both technological sophistication and operational reliability. The FAA will continue to enforce temporary airspace restrictions until the incident review concludes. CBP and Pentagon investigators will determine accountability, evaluate procedural failures, and recommend safeguards. Possible outcomes include revised interagency communication protocols, operational delays for high-risk drone flights, and policy changes regarding military technology use in domestic airspace. Findings may influence congressional oversight hearings and inform future domestic deployment of experimental weapons systems. Hillary Clinton's Epstein deposition. The Jeffrey Epstein case has remained a focal point of public and congressional scrutiny due to Epstein's vast network, allegations of sexual abuse, and connections to high-profile political and business figures. Investigations and hearings surrounding Epstein have extended across multiple jurisdictions and branches of government. In recent years, members of Congress have sought testimony from individuals with potential knowledge of Epstein's activities, including public officials who may have encountered relevant information during their careers. Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State, 2009 to 2013, and 2016 Democratic presidential nominee, has long faced public attention and scrutiny over her personal and political connections. In this context, her deposition regarding Epstein's activities is a notable development, highlighting the ongoing intersection of criminal investigations, congressional oversight, and partisan politics. According to reports, Hillary Clinton attended a 6-hour closed-door deposition conducted by a House Oversight Committee inquiry into Jeffrey Epstein. The deposition explored topics including Epstein's network, known associates, and prior knowledge of allegations of abuse. Specific details of Clinton's testimony remain confidential due to the closed-door nature of the session. Following the deposition, Clinton publicly called for President Donald Trump to testify before the committee, framing it as necessary for a full understanding of the case. She criticized the Republican-led investigation as repetitive and politically motivated, suggesting that the inquiry may be seeking partisan advantage rather than pursuing new facts. No formal allegations were made against Clinton herself during the deposition, and her statements emphasized procedural fairness and comprehensive accountability in investigating Epstein. From a legal and political analysis perspective, several points emerge. Closed-door testimony. Congressional committees often conduct depositions in private when sensitive information or ongoing criminal investigations are involved. The length of the deposition, 6 hours, indicates a thorough questioning process, consistent with high-profile, complex cases. Political dynamics. The public statements following the deposition highlight the partisan context. Clinton's call for Trump to testify shifts the focus onto the broader investigative landscape, framing the inquiry as incomplete without testimony from multiple prominent figures. Oversight versus criminal investigation. Congressional committees can subpoena testimony and documents, but criminal prosecutions are handled separately by federal and state prosecutors. Public scrutiny of congressional hearings often blends legal findings with political narratives, which experts note can complicate public perception of credibility and motive. Newsroom analysts emphasize that while the deposition itself is procedural, the statements made afterward are designed to influence public understanding and signal positions to both lawmakers and the electorate. Domestically, the deposition underscores the ongoing political and legal attention surrounding Epstein's network. Public confidence in oversight mechanisms relies on transparency, accountability, and a perception that investigations are conducted fairly, irrespective of political affiliation. High-profile figures being questioned contributes to national discourse on ethics, governance, and justice. Internationally, the Epstein case has attracted global media coverage, and actions by U.S. officials, including depositions and congressional oversight, signal to the world how the U.S. addresses allegations involving elite networks. The implications affect diplomacy, reputational considerations, and broader conversations about corruption and abuse of power. The House Oversight Committee may continue seeking testimony from other high-profile individuals, including President Trump and additional associates of Epstein. Committee members may issue public reports summarizing key findings once confidentiality rules permit. Media scrutiny and public debate are likely to continue, particularly regarding partisan framing of the investigation. Legal teams and congressional counsel will continue negotiating the scope of testimony and document production, with potential implications for ongoing federal and state investigations into Epstein-related activities. U.S.-Iran nuclear talks end without deal. For decades, Iran's nuclear program has been a central point of contention in international relations. Multiple administrations of the United States and global partners have sought to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons while allowing legitimate civilian nuclear energy development. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, signed in 2015, aimed to restrict Iran's nuclear capabilities in exchange for sanctions relief. The United States' withdrawal from the agreement in 2018 under President Donald Trump reignited tensions, leading to renewed sanctions, regional military posturing, and intermittent negotiations. The 2026 talks in Geneva, Switzerland were part of ongoing international efforts to prevent a nuclear escalation. Mediators, including European powers and the United Nations, attempted to bridge gaps in technical and political agreements between the U.S. and Iran. The Geneva negotiations concluded without a formal agreement. Point. Both the United States and Iran reported progress in technical discussions, but no binding commitments were reached. Mediators announced that technical work will continue in Vienna, focusing on specific nuclear program restrictions, monitoring protocols, and timelines. The diplomatic impasse leaves both nations on heightened military alert, with U.S. forces already positioned in the region and Iran reportedly preparing contingencies. No new sanctions or immediate military action has been announced, but both sides have maintained strong public statements signaling that a failure to reach an agreement could have serious consequences. Officials emphasized that while some technical areas showed convergence, differences over verification, uranium enrichment levels, and enforcement mechanisms remain unresolved. From an analytical perspective, the lack of a formal deal highlights the challenges of reconciling security concerns, political constraints, and domestic pressures on both sides. Key insights include progress versus agreement. While both sides report progress, this often refers to preliminary discussions and mutual understanding rather than legally binding commitments. This allows each nation to claim diplomatic momentum while preparing for possible escalation. Technical work in Vienna. Moving discussions to Vienna allows for more focused, expert-level negotiations on nuclear inspections, verification mechanisms, and technical limitations. Analysts see this as a strategic approach to prevent immediate collapse while addressing critical details. Military alert. The ongoing positioning of U.S. military forces and Iran's reported preparations reflect a delicate balance of deterrence and signaling. Experts note that any miscalculation could escalate tensions rapidly. Newsroom experts also stress that public messaging plays a role. Each side seeks to reassure domestic audiences while maintaining leverage in negotiations. The interplay of diplomacy and military readiness is a classic pattern in high-stakes international negotiations. Domestically, the stalled talks influence U.S. foreign policy strategy, congressional oversight, and regional defense planning. Public attention and media coverage are heightened due to the potential consequences of escalation in the Middle East. Globally, these negotiations are closely monitored by allies, adversaries, and neutral powers. Failure to secure an agreement may affect global energy markets, international trade, and regional security alliances. European and Asian nations involved in mediation have a vested interest in avoiding escalation and maintaining stability in a region critical to global oil supply and international commerce. The negotiations also have broader implications for non-proliferation efforts worldwide. A failure to achieve a binding deal could embolden other states pursuing nuclear capabilities without sufficient oversight. Technical talks will continue in Vienna, focusing on verification, uranium enrichment limits, and compliance mechanisms. Both nations remain on high military alert, maintaining forces in strategic positions. Diplomatic channels will continue to work with allies and mediators to prevent escalation. Global stakeholders will monitor for any signs of unilateral actions, sanctions, or covert activities that could destabilize the region. The outcome of these discussions will shape U.S.-Iran relations, regional security, and global non-proliferation norms for years to come. Columbia University ICE controversy. Colleges and universities in the United States are frequently the sites of legal, political, and civil rights controversies because they represent intersections of individual rights, academic freedom, and government authority. Columbia University, one of the nation's oldest and most prominent research institutions, has a long history of student activism and engagement with broader social issues. As such, incidents involving law enforcement interactions on campus often attract heightened scrutiny, public attention, and debate over jurisdiction, transparency, and civil liberties. At the same time, federal immigration enforcement, carried out by agencies such as U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE), operates under mandates to detain individuals who are suspected of violating federal immigration laws. ICE's authority to enter private property, including university campuses, generally depends on warrants, clearly articulated legal justification, and cooperation with property owners, unless exigent circumstances apply. Municipal leadership, including mayors of major cities, can influence how local law enforcement and community relations interface with federal authorities, particularly when sensitive issues such as immigration enforcement intersect with public safety and civil liberties. According to the information provided in the headline, federal agents from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement entered a building on the Columbia University campus. They did so under circumstances that university officials have described as involving misrepresentation of their intent, specifically, claiming they were searching for a missing person in order to gain access. Inside that building, ICE agents detained a student. The identity of the student, including citizenship status or immigration history, has not been publicly disclosed in detail, consistent with privacy norms for individuals involved in law enforcement actions. Following the detention, Columbia University officials protested the manner in which federal agents gained access to campus facilities, asserting that there was deception involved and that this raised concerns about consent, transparency, and respect for university property. Subsequently, the student was released from custody. The release occurred after a reported meeting, described by some accounts as a mystery meeting, between Mayor Zoran Mamdani of Zoran Mamdani and Donald Trump. Public details about the meeting's content, who was present, and its official purpose have not been fully disclosed, but the timing coincided with the student's release. Officials from Columbia University stated that they were engaged in ongoing communication with city and federal authorities about the incident, and that the university continues to raise concerns about how federal enforcement actions intersect with campus policy and civil rights protections. From a legal and civic perspective, this case highlights a recurring tension between federal enforcement authority and institutional autonomy. Universities generally expect that law enforcement access to campus facilities will be governed by warrants, clearly articulated legal authority, and mutual respect for institutional policy. Allegations that federal agents misrepresented their purpose to gain entry raise questions about consent and procedural safeguards. Legal analysts note that federal authorities, including ICE, have certain powers to conduct operations without advance notice in exigent circumstances. For example, if there is an imminent threat to life or public safety. However, deploying such authority in a context that appears to involve mischaracterization of intent can erode trust between institutions and law enforcement. The involvement of municipal leadership, in this case the mayor, adds a political dimension. When local elected officials become engaged in negotiations or public advocacy related to federal actions, the lines between legal process and political influence can appear blurred. Newsroom analysts typically emphasize the importance of transparency in such exchanges, both to maintain public confidence and to clarify the distinct roles of local and federal actors. Civil liberties advocates often argue that actions perceived as deceptive by law enforcement can chill free speech, academic freedom, and the willingness of students and faculty to engage openly in campus life. Opponents may contend that federal agencies should retain discretion to pursue enforcement against individuals who are believed to be in violation of immigration law, even on private property, provided that legal standards are met. Domestically, the incident matters because it touches on fundamental questions about privacy, institutional sovereignty, and the limits of government authority. Colleges and universities are microcosms of broader society, and incidents that unfold on campus often reflect larger legal and policy debates with national implications. For students and academic communities, the perception of an unexpected federal law enforcement presence can contribute to feelings of insecurity and concern about civil liberties. For policymakers, the case may prompt reviews of interagency protocols governing how federal agents coordinate with universities, particularly regarding warrants, campus access, and communication with institutional leaders. Globally, Similar tensions arise in other countries where immigration enforcement intersects with academic freedom and institutional autonomy. International observers may see this case as part of a broader conversation about how democratic societies balance security priorities with respect for individual rights and the rule of law. Legal experts anticipate that Columbia University may pursue clarity on the legal basis for federal access to campus buildings in this case, potentially through judicial review if warrants or other authorizations were issued. University administrators and municipal officials may work to establish or reinforce protocols governing how federal agencies communicate with campuses before, during, or after enforcement actions. Federal authorities could review internal procedures to ensure alignment with legal standards and reduce the risk of similar controversies in the future. Public debate may continue, with civil liberties organizations, student groups, and lawmakers weighing in on broader implications for campus autonomy and immigration enforcement.